Hi, I want to talk about the recent Jubilee debate between Jordan Peterson and 20 atheists. Before we dive into the comments or the discussion that Peterson had with these 20 atheists, I want to zoom in on the four statements that Peterson brought to the table and talk about them briefly, just for the substance of the statements or the meaning of the statements and what's implied in them. I'm not going to touch on everything that I could conceivably talk about in these statements from Peterson, nor in this debate. It was kind of a fire hose of concepts, many of which, or if not most of which, were not defined, and so it's kind of a nightmare to try to get your head around exactly what to zoom in on. So I'm going to zoom in on just a few things that I think are essential or worth talking about, and that I have something to say about. Peterson's first statement is,
atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
This is a really interesting statement, particularly in light of what we're going to hear Peterson say about the nature of God and whether God can be understood, whether he can be known, whether he's even something we can get our heads around. So I just want to sort of note this from the front, that he's criticizing atheists for rejecting something that they don't understand. And it's worth just zooming in on what does it mean to understand something. To understand means to know what ideas stand under the abstraction you're trying to understand, and ultimately what connects it to reality in your mind. That's what the meaning of understand is. It's one of these words that is beautifully descriptive of its own meaning. To understand means to grasp what stands under the idea and connects it to reality. When a professional intellectual is trying to explain to a lay audience what he thinks makes sense in this world, if he's trying to explain some big abstraction, like morality or philosophy or God or something, he should be able to break it down to the simple components that constitute the abstraction, the complex idea, and bring it down to some units that we can understand, that we can connect to reality in our own mind. The concept of making sense has the same kind of thing. We want to make sense of the world. We want to have our ideas make it to the sensory level. So this is what Peterson is saying, in effect, here, is that atheists reject God, but they haven't made sense of God. They don't understand God. They haven't connected God to reality in their minds. Okay, so just bear that in mind as we start going through this. Relevant to this point, of course, is what is our means of understanding? What is our means of knowledge? Now, religious people do not like to be faced with the question, is faith a means of knowledge or not? Because religious people treat faith as a means of knowledge, but they don't want to claim that it's a means of knowledge. So they'll say things like, well, it's a way of believing, or it's confidence in something. But we have concepts to capture those ideas. The reason we need the concept of faith is because some people treat just knowing something without any basis in evidence for the idea as sufficient for accepting the idea. So if you accept an idea on the basis of evidence, you're accepting it on reason. And we have a concept for that, and we'll talk more about that later. But if you accept an idea with no evidence, or either in the absence of evidence or in defiance of evidence, you're accepting it on faith. And that's really what faith means. So that's worth bearing in mind, too, as we get into this, is that if we're to understand things or make sense of things, we ought to have a means of doing that. And let's be clear about what that is. The second statement that Peterson puts on the table is this:
morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
The concept within is an interesting concept there, because I would agree that morality and purpose can't be found within science. Nothing can be found within science. Science isn't a boundary or a region. Science is a method. It's a methodology of using observation, conceptual integration, and the principles of logic to understand the world and connect our big abstract ideas to perceptual evidence. That's what science is. And the question of whether we can get morality and purpose by means of that method is a very interesting question. And I think that what Peterson is trying to say here is that you can't get morality and purpose through any kind of a scientific, rational method. And that's his criticism there. The third claim that Peterson puts on the table is
everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
I would agree with this, at least if you say every rational person worships something. If by worship you mean to revere someone or to revere something, to hold something in high regard or perhaps even the highest regard. I think you have to do this if you're going to think clearly about what's important in your life, what you should do. Ayn Rand famously pointed out that if you don't have your values hierarchized, in their list, organized in their order of importance in your mind, you literally can't make value calculations because you don't know what's more important to you and what's less important to you. So what's the basis for the calculation of what you should do? So Peterson is right about a certain element here, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. My contention will be that he's claiming that to have value hierarchies, you have to believe in and accept God, and I think that to believe in and accept God is actually to eviscerate the possibility of value hierarchies, or at least value hierarchies that have any meaning and significance and use value in life. Peterson's fourth claim is
atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
First of all, atheists is just a big category of people who don't believe in God and doesn't say what they believe in. But I think it's probably true that atheists deny something about the biblical stories. We don't deny that they exist, so I don't think you can mean that. Obviously, the stories exist. They are stories. What we deny is that they're divinely infused or inspired or delivered. We deny that they make sense. We deny that, or at least I deny that the atheists of my persuasion, who embrace rational philosophy instead of religion or some kind of dogma, what we deny about those stories is that they are of any significant value beyond maybe a phrase here or there. In guiding our thinking and action. There are no heroes, in my view, in the Bible. There are no people worthy of emulating in the Bible, people who accept ideas on faith and do whatever some dictator allegedly divine dictator tells them to do just because he said to do it. These are not heroic people. That's what I personally deny about these stories, is that they are of that kind of value. And the Bible certainly does not give any advice or good advice for how to live. It does exactly the opposite. The overarching theme is that self-sacrifice is moral, and obedience to God's commands because he commanded them is imperative. Those are the opening statements from Peterson for the four sections of this debate. And the way the debate works is Peterson makes the statement, and then people rush to chairs to try to get to be the one to discuss that topic with him. But I'm going to play some of it, and I may pause as we go and discuss some of it as we go. Anyway, here we go.
I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the.
I want to pause just for a second here to observe the anger that has already welled up in Peterson. I think we're only at like the second of, maybe 10 people who sit down with him to talk. And Peterson is coming into this just with a vicious attitude toward these young people who are just trying to understand what he's saying. And as we'll see, he doesn't want to help them at all to understand what he's saying, unless he's going to say something that is non-controversial and trivial, in effect, with the exception of stuff about value hierarchies, which is significant. And when we get to that, we'll see where he makes some good points there. But he's not coming to this with any kind of good faith.
I said,
That
right.
is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality.
According to this reading of the Bible, which I think is accurate, and I think the elsewhere in the Bible you can find that the idea of God is that he is fundamentally unknowable. That's the point, and religious people and theologians and preachers and rabbis and the like say this fairly regularly, that God is unknowable or ineffable. They have different words for essentially the same idea. But note right here that the criticism in this section is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand God, or they don't know God. Well, if God is not knowable, then no one can know him. So what's the point? And if God is not knowable, the reason he's not knowable is that there's no evidence for him. If there's evidence for something, evidence is what makes the thing knowable. There's perceptual observation of the thing. There's some degree of of either sensory evidence or logical integration based on sensory evidence. And if that doesn't exist, if we can't know God, then we can't know God. There's no point in talking about God. The subject is simply moot. There is no subject. And so in a sense here, Peterson has already given up the game by acknowledging that God is unknowable. If you just turn this to any other topic, if I said there's a schmatzelwagger, and you said, well, what's that? And I said, well, it's this thing that's unknowable. And they said, well, tell me about it. Well, I can't tell you about it because I don't know about it. No one knows about it. It would be the end of the discussion, right? You wouldn't build a worldview around the Schwarzenegger. So this is just a right up the front sort of a confession of having nothing to stand on here, and of the charade that is religion.
Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that, in its essence, is unknowable and overwhelming.
So it's not simple. He already told us earlier that it's complex. It's overwhelming. It's not this guy in the sky that atheists sometimes mock. Well, the reason we come up with the guy in the sky thing is because when you try to define in any way, shape, or form what this thing is, rather than saying it's unknowable or undefinable or ineffable or the like, you have to put your finger on something, and the something usually is, as we're going to hear, that the idea is that God is the creator of the universe, the maker of moral law. He's omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, right? So these are the ideas, and he's supposed to be sort of out there somewhere. So it's silly of religionists to get upset when people talk about their God as a guy in the sky. If you put all that together, it is a guy in the sky who dictates everything. He's up there or out there somewhere, and he's just dictating everything. So I object to the mockery of the guy in the sky metaphor. It's perfectly legitimate. Anyway, back to the essence here, which is that Peterson is now going to go on to tell us how unknowable God is and how complex he is, and ultimately how infinite he is, Yet the criticism remains that we're not embracing this guy. We're rejecting this guy when we don't know him and can't know him. And just the absurdity of that position is really worth noting.
That isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole.
So he's saying to this guy, what if you say something that's unknowable and you have to establish a relationship to this thing anyway? This is just gobbledygook. This is just word salad coming out of his mouth. No one's going to make a claim about something that is unknowable unless he's a religionist trying to defend the idea of God. We don't do that. Rational people don't just blurt words out and then say, well, it's unknowable, but I have to establish a relationship with this unknowable. This is what's going on here, is that Peterson is putting that on the table as a viable thing. And unfortunately, some of these people he's discussing this with are not picking up on these kinds of fundamental absurdities. They're hitting his word salads with other ideas that are worth mentioning. But the fundamental here is that Peterson is talking about nothing. There is no subject matter here so far.
Help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
So we are finite, but we have to establish a relationship with the infinite. Why? What is the infinite? Infinite is not an existent out there. The infinity or the infinite is, I think, just the only legitimate use of it is as a mathematical term to capture the idea of a series that doesn't end, in a sense. But that's not out in the world. That's a tool used, a conceptual tool that mathematicians use. But there's no such thing as the infinite, which is why you can't define the infinite. Well, it's a thing that goes on forever. Well, what goes on forever? What's not limited? What has no limitation? Even the universe is limited to being what it is. It is a certain thing, and it has certain properties, and it's limited to those properties. So that's why things can't both be A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect, because even the universe is limited to being what it is. So the infinite, this idea of there even being an infinite, doesn't make any sense. To this gentleman's other point, that if you just define things willy-nilly, if Peterson's going to define a Christian or a religious person as someone who has strong beliefs about something, which we're going to get to, then you're defining the concept out of existence. We don't need that concept. The facts of reality that give rise to the need of the concept of religion is that there's a certain kind of philosophy that involves a supernatural dimension, claims about a supernatural dimension, claims that faith or revelation is a means of knowledge, is a means of knowing what is true. And this concept of religion differentiates from secular philosophies. For instance, the philosophy I embrace, the philosophy of objectivism, which does not claim there's a supernatural dimension, but only a natural world, and does not acknowledge or does not recognize or does not put up with the nonsense, I should say, that faith is a means of knowledge. It's not a means of knowledge, and nor is revelation. Our means of knowledge is reason, perceptual observation, conceptual integration, and logic, connecting ideas to reality by the principle of non-contradiction. If an idea connects to reality without contradiction, then it's true. If it doesn't connect to reality without contradiction, then it's either false or arbitrary, just floating in the air.
So morality is intrinsic.
I think.
So it precedes science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right, require some level of morality or...
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just indicated.
Well, first of all, kudos to this young man for pointing out something true. It's not precise, but it's true, which is that the reason that ancient humans needed morality was in order to live. And he points out that in order to live socially, they needed it. And that's true. But more fundamentally, in order to live at all, we need to have an integrated, principled conception of what is good and bad for our life, so that we know which actions to take and which actions not to take, so that we can live as the kind of animal we are. And this is the essence of the foundation of rational morality, is this idea that the facts of reality that give rise to the need of morality are that human beings are alive, and if they want to remain alive and flourish, if they want to live fully as human beings, they need a code of values and principles to guide their thinking and action. And this young man actually hits on that, at least implicitly, with his answer about why these ancient human beings needed morality in some way. But then Peterson goes on to say that that science can't exist except within the framework of morality. And he's going to go on to say that morality is not a science, so that science is not value free. Science has to exist in a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific. This is just simply not true. Science, in the broadest sense of the term, encapsulates the use of reason, of perceptual observation, conceptual integration, and logic, the use of logic, to any specific subject that is of a natural subject that's of concern to human beings. And we have the broadest science of all, which is philosophy, which studies what's true of existence as such, of things that exist as such, or zeroing in on human beings, what's true of human beings as such, universally true of human beings. That's the human nature and epistemology and ethics parts of philosophy. And then within philosophy, as I just mentioned, we have a field like ethics, which is the science of understanding what is good and bad, right and wrong. And the way you make a science of that is you ask what facts of reality give rise to the need of concepts such as good and bad, right and wrong, or morality, or good or evil. So morality is a science, and in a sense, you could say that science exists within the broader framework of morality, a very, very broad science. The specialized sciences exist within there because all of them are taking place, at least the legitimate ones, in service of human life. And in that sense, sure, they exist within the framework of the science of ethics, or the science of morality. In another sense, science can be seen as the broader of these two terms, in that it is any endeavor that applies reason to the understanding of some aspect of nature or existence that human beings need to understand. And in that case, ethics would be housed within the concept of science. But what is absolutely also true is that science has, and we're going to get to this shortly, science is concerned with values. Science itself is concerned with truth, understanding what is true, what is knowledge, how do we know what we know about physics or chemistry or biology or economics or psychology, right? So it is not value free. All of these things are value infused, and they all integrate beautifully together when you understand them this way. There is no dichotomy between science and morality, and in a sense, they arise simultaneously in human life because they serve essentially the same purpose, which is to enable us to understand the world and live.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky, because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. Okay. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori. Okay. Right? That's why we define science as value-free. Mm-hmm. But that has to be wrong, because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation. Okay. And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
This is worth pausing on, because this is just further discussion about the relationship of science and morality, or in this case, purpose and morality. And the fact of the matter is that we have one faculty of knowledge, one faculty of understanding, and that is our rational faculty. And whatever we want to understand in this world, whether it's the broadest science, philosophy, whether it's a narrow science like biochemistry, or whether it is any other specialized science, we have one faculty that is our means of knowledge, and that's reason. It's perceptual observation, conceptual integration, and the use of the laws of logic to make sure that we don't have contradictions in our mind or ideas that contradict facts at the perceptual level. This is how we know the world. So science definitely applies that, and different sciences use different additional methods. Some sciences use numerical measurement to calculate things. Some use ordinal measurement. That's what morality uses, ordinal measurement. The hierarchy of values is the way that you measure what is better or worse for your life and how you should and shouldn't act. So it does have measurement, but it's a different kind of measurement than, for instance, physics would use. So science is simply the application of reason to some specific concern in the natural world. So this idea that Peterson is trying to set up, that there's some way in which morality has to be parked away from science, but science gets to partake in morality. Science gets to have, gets to have an aim and gets to be value laden, but morality does not get to be fact based and fact laden. That's what he's trying to say here, and it's absolutely false. Reason applies to both fields and to all fields if they are legitimate fields.
If you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based.
Okay, so now he's saying explicitly that morality and purpose can come only from religion, and he's giving us a new definition of God here, which is that God is the unity on which moral claims can be based. So given that we've already been told that God is unknowable, now we're being told that he's the unity on which we can base our moral claims. Well, if you don't know the unity on which you can base your moral claims, you're going to be stuck with no morality. So again, he's just giving the whole thing away here by not having a coherent way of talking about his subject. Not that he really could, but he seems not even to recognize that he's just putting his foot in his mouth regularly here. Now, this idea that you can get purpose and morality only from religion is not only false, it's obscenely false. In religion, you have this commandment, thou shalt accept ideas on faith, in effect. You have to just believe in God, even though there is no evidence for the existence of God. That is immoral on its face, because it's telling people don't use your fundamental means of knowing what's true and false, right and wrong, and don't use your basic means of living, your reasoning mind. Instead, Just accept these ideas as true. So that, I mean, it's just obscenely false. You can no more get morality through faith than you could get anything else through faith. If you know, just believing that this drug is going to cure your cancer isn't going to make it cure your cancer. Just believing that eating lots of cake and ice cream is good for your diet isn't going to make it so. We would never apply this to any other area of life. So the idea that you get more, and insofar as you do accept morality from God, by the way, from this alleged God, so you're saying, oh, the commandments of this, you know, divine dictator in the sky, that's what I'm going to go by. It doesn't make it objective anyway. It makes it utterly subjective. You're just getting dictates from a consciousness in the sky, just as personal subjectivism is the idea that whatever I say or believe is good. And just as social subjectivism is the idea that whatever society says is good, so too supernatural subjectivism is just the idea whatever God says is good. But we don't get good because someone said so. We get the idea of good by asking what facts of reality give rise to the need of the concept of good. And those facts that give rise to the need of that concept are precisely that we're a certain kind of being such that if we want to live, if we want to remain in existence, and if we want to flourish, we have to gain certain kinds of knowledge and we have to act in certain ways and not in other ways. And that's where objective morality comes from, secular, genuine objective morality. As for purpose, to get purpose from an outside source isn't your purpose at all. It's just being told you must do something. It's like a guard in a prison telling you you have to do this or you have to do that. Purpose is a chosen goal, and if it's a rational purpose, it's a chosen goal that serves your long-term self-interest, that your long-term survival and happiness requirements. That's what a purpose is. So a purpose is like a career that you choose and you pursue because it gives you purpose in life and fills your life with meaning and joy, or friendships that you love, or vacations you want to plan down the way, or a party you're going to throw this weekend for your friend or your wife or your lover. So purposes don't presuppose a guy in the sky. Purposes presuppose a rational mind with goals and thoughtfulness about how to live and how to function so as to have a beautiful, joyful life. So this claim here is just, once you try to define terms, it is on its face absurd.
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice.
The purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward self-sacrifice. Voluntary, upward self-sacrifice. Toward what end?
So that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So we're supposed to have an upward trajectory of giving up what's important and good to us, sacrifice, so that we can create this kingdom of heaven here on earth. This is, again, just nonsense. This is just word salad. First of all, why we don't need a, quote, kingdom of, we don't even understand what a kingdom of heaven is on earth. We don't need that on earth. What we need on earth is human beings to understand that in order to live wonderful lives, we have to think in certain ways and act in certain ways and not in other ways. And the way that we figure all that out is by using reason, not by closing our eyes and making up religious stories. So that's what we need. And the idea that the purpose of life, or the purpose of morality, or the purpose of anything related to human beings could be to give up your values to try to create some fictional world, so-called kingdom of heaven on earth, is just completely arbitrary. There's no evidence to support it whatsoever. And speaking of evidence, the idea that human beings should sacrifice at all, whether sacrificing themselves to others or sacrificing others to themselves, is completely baseless. Ayn Rand famously pointed out that no one has ever answered the question, why should man sacrifice? Why should we be sacrificial animals, sacrificing self to others or others to self? There's no reason for it. Human beings don't need human sacrifice. What we need is to think and produce and trade with each other voluntarily if we want to, and live. And there's no need for sacrifice in any of that. There's need only for gain. So this again is just Peterson making word salads, and insofar as you can understand anything that he's saying, it's evil rather than moral.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's
Okay.
a good way of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand? So here's the deal.
At
we
minimum,
can
it's
get into
the
an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
We
that?
can
Get into heaven and avoid hell. Why? These are just made up things. There's no evidence for heaven. There's no evidence for hell. What is there evidence for? There's evidence for this life and this world in which we live. There's evidence for the fact that you have to act in certain ways in order to live and have a wonderful life, and acting in other ways will destroy that possibility. And this is where the human mind needs to be focused on reality, not on nature, not on supernature. Using reason, not using faith and revelation to just make stuff up that we have to be terrified by or long for, that have nothing to do with life or the factual needs of human beings here in the world. So I find these discussions just astonishing on one level. On another hand, I understand why so many people are so lost on this, because unless you have a rational philosophy that can make sense of human life and how we discover standards of value and standards of truth and standards of morality and what purpose is and all of that, it's hard. It's complicated. But the thing is that there's a philosophy that spells all of this out with really clear concretizations, tying it to reality, showing that it's true. And if you just read it, if people read, for instance, Ayn Rand's work or various other objectivists, Leonard Peikoff has written wonderful books. I've written several books on and lots of articles on these subjects. And if people read them, you just start to see the world in a whole nother way that gets around this chaos of nonsense that these kinds of debates consist of.
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Okay, now this guy just asked a perfectly legitimate question. Do you believe in an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-perfect God? That this is sort of the standard historic definition of God. It's not a viable definition because it's just in negatives. He's unlimited in all of these regards, so he has no limits. This goes back to the issue of infinite. So it's not really a viable definition, but it's what is reasonably taken by someone to be the meaning of God when somebody says God, particularly when somebody speaking about the Bible, whether he's a Christian or not, says the word God. You can assume that this is what he's talking about and that he believes in this thing. Peterson derails this question by saying to the guy, well, what do you mean by believe? As if, regular people and, longtime academic intellectuals like Peterson don't know what this term means. And what's really interesting is the young man gives a perfectly legitimate answer to what belief means, and then Peterson accuses him of committing the fallacy of circular definition. So listen to this.
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true.
Now that is just a ridiculous claim. The definition, a perfectly viable definition of the concept of belief, is to think something to be true or to accept something as true. Now, you can accept something as true on the basis of evidence, so that's rational acceptance of an idea, or you can accept something as true in the absence of evidence or even in defiance of evidence, and that's why we have the concept of faith. So you can believe through reason or you can believe through faith. And belief is a term that is useful. I mean, sometimes we don't have sufficient evidence to fully believe something, but we have substantial evidence to think that it's true. And this happens a lot in life. If I arrive at home and I see my wife's car in the driveway, I have really good reason to believe that she's home. But it's not knowledge that she's home. She might have gone for a walk or have gone out with a friend or something in another car. So belief is a perfectly legitimate concept, but it needs to be defined, and it needs to be differentiated, the kinds of belief to, evidence-based or not evidence-based. So it's an interesting discussion that you could have about this. But when the young man asks Peterson, do you believe in this kind of God? And Peterson skirts the question and just says, what do you mean by believe? And by the way, he completely derailed this, as we'll see. They're not going back to whether Peterson believes in that kind of God, because Peterson successfully derailed this question.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
So this is ridiculous too. To accept something as true does not mean that you live for it or die for it. I can accept as true that my wife is home if I see her car in the driveway, and I can believe it to be true. I could be right or wrong about that, but I'm not going to live or die for her being home in that moment. There's a sense in which the idea of belief does tie to action, which is where Peterson is going to go here to some extent. But it ties in this way. If you truly believe something, that means your actions will reflect that fact. So if I were to say, I believe I can jump off, a 50-story building and fly, with no contraption to help me, you could say, well, I don't think you really believe that. Because if you did, you would go do it and show me that you believe it. And of course, I wouldn't do it because I don't believe it. So just saying that you believe something does not mean that you believe it. Your actions speak louder than your words, and as the cliche goes. And that's true, but it's kind of trivially true. And Peterson is I think he was trying to make that kind of point, but he's so angry at this point, and he's feels so uncomfortable in his skin that instead he lashes out and he makes a complete buffoon of himself here.
It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Listen to the alternative he's putting on the table there. You're either fragmented and you worship multiple gods, or there's effectively one god at the base, and that makes you a big force. Well, what about the idea that there are no gods, Jordan? What about the possibility that we just choose values based on what we think is going to support our life and long-term happiness, and that we organize our values and make decisions on the basis of that kind of rational thinking? This is just completely out of the picture in this discussion, or at least from Peterson's perspective. And, in a sense, Peterson sounds like he's either pure evil or crazy or some mixture of the two. But you got to give, I guess, everyone to some extent a break if they were raised in a religious environment or with religious in a religious family where this stuff is shoved down their throats. Religion destroys the mind because it makes you believe that your reason is not efficacious, not sufficient to understand the world, to understand who you are, what human nature is, what good and bad, right and wrong are. It's just not a good tool for that. And those are the really important questions. It can answer trivial questions, like scientific, questions about chemistry and engineering, but it can't answer the really big questions. And if you're raised that way and you accept it, which you don't have to, but if you do, you simply become progressively stupid. as an adult, and I think this is what has happened to Peterson. I think his mind is simply disintegrating under the weight of nonsense.
So you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life?
be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career.
Here he is just lashing out. This young man is just simply trying to get his head around what Peterson thinks about things, and whether he holds on to not, thou shalt not tell a lie as some kind of categorical imperative, or whether he would tell a lie to save his life or someone else's life, and we're going to go to others here in a minute. But Peterson is just viciously angry at seemingly at the world at this point, but definitely at the people in this crowd and this young man. And it's unjustified. The young man is just trying to get clear on what Peterson thinks, and Peterson is just derailing questions, refusing to say what he thinks. Now, this business of never telling a lie, Peterson is a bit of a Kantian, as a lot of religious people are. They hold moral absolutes, or they hold commandments as moral absolutes. So it's the idea, thou shalt never tell a lie, rather than what a rational morality says about lying and honesty, which is you must never fake reality. You must never pretend that facts are other than they are. Why? Not because some commandment tells you that, but because you want to keep your mind connected to reality, because reality is where you live. And if your mind's not connected to that realm, then it's not going to be efficacious in that realm. So you should never pretend that facts are other than they are. But if someone is going to kill you, if you don't call a pen something other than a pen, you can absolutely lie to that person to get out of that emergency situation. And doing so is not dishonest. In fact, it's an act of honesty. It's an act of you refusing to pretend that facts are other than they are. In other words, refusing to pretend that this person making you do this has any right to do it, or has any right to any truth at all. Virtue owes nothing to vice. We don't owe people who do horrible things truth about anything. What we owe them is disrespect and disengagement, and if they violate rights, we owe them force, and if they try to kill us, we owe them death. But Peterson doesn't think this way, and again, it's a bit obscene for someone his age and in his profession to be as lost as he is. But again, it shows how utterly destroyed a mind can be when it accepts religious ideas, particularly fundamental ideas like faith is a means of knowledge, or there's a God and you can't know him, but you have to say you know him anyway, et cetera, et cetera.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone's
Yeah,
life?
and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have done
asking?
everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that
would
situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
Why?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
I understand why people, and I've been there myself, don't want to answer absurd hypotheticals or hypotheticals that involve, metaphysical impossibilities or the like. But this is not some absurd hypothetical. This is a hypothetical that actually happened to a lot of people. And not just in Nazi Germany. It happens if a robber comes to your door and says, do you have a safe in your house? And you do have a safe in your house, but you say no. Well, you've lied. Did you commit some kind of a moral transgression? No, you didn't. It was an act of honesty. You were acknowledging all of the available and relevant facts. The robber is acknowledging none of them, including especially the one that what's in your safe doesn't belong to him. So if you have a proper conception of honesty, if you have a proper conception of morality more generally, then you don't wind up in some weird bind like this. It's like, of course I would lie to the Nazis about whether I had Jews in the attic, and I would stand morally erect doing it. That's exactly what I should do. But Peterson can't think this way. And if you are religious, you can't think this way generally because you're not getting your moral principles from observations, integrations, and logic. You're getting them from 10 Commandments or the hundreds of commandments in the Bible.
Did you eat
Don't
today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just asking
Yes,
if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
It's absurd for Peterson to say that. There were people in Nazi Germany who were born into that situation, or I didn't mean to have that. There were people in Nazi Germany who were born into that situation and had no say in it, certainly children and even young adults up to a certain point didn't know fully what was going on. Many of them did, which is why they were able to support a leader like Hitler. But the fact is that, again, we don't have to be in Nazi Germany to discuss this. If a robber knocks on your door, you're in one of those situations and you didn't choose it. So it's just irresponsible and and immoral of Peterson to be taking these positions and doing it in a way where he's trying to make an ass of these perfectly legitimate questions that these young people are asking. All right, we're going to move to another clip here. This one's almost 10 minutes long, but it's worth spending some time with it because the young woman in the seat this time wants to talk about, shouldn't use this term, but basically she's trying to talk about what a standard of value is or what an ultimate purpose is. And I want to zoom in on that because this is one of the most important issues in all of morality.
So I want to start off with defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Until he said whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping. That's a misuse of the concept of worship. But it's absolutely true that the idea of worship does involve something that you regard as extremely valuable or you have high esteem for the person or the thing, or you have you hold it in relation to other values as very high up. And so kudos to Peterson for getting this. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of the whole discussion because they're talking about how you know what is a value and what's the base and how they relate to other values. And this young woman is particularly good because she's pressing Peterson for a foundational value to work with.
So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of this value-laden hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose. Right. At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Just want to pause here to point out that Peterson says yes, that the hierarchy, in his hierarchy, at the very, very foundation of it, or the pinnacle, however you're looking at the hierarchy, is God. Why? We can't, this is a thing we don't know, can't define clearly, apparently. We haven't gotten a clear definition from Peterson. So what business does it have it being in anyone's hierarchy? Whereas rational philosophy, or rational morality in particular, holds the factual requirements of human life as the standard of moral value, and then the individual's own life and personal happiness as his or her ultimate value. And the reason we have two different concepts there is because the factual requirements of human life, the universal requirements of human life, things like we need to use reason and we need to have purposes and we need love and we have an emotional faculty and we need self-esteem, and these kinds of facts about human life are universal, and we need to understand what kind of animal we are. But then we are particular beings, particular kinds, or particular individual people within that sphere of the kind of animal we are, and we have our own particular values. I like writing and making videos and teaching, and other people like gardening or dentistry or painting. So those are what we call personal values or optional values within the realm of universal values. And in a rational value hierarchy, you have your life and the requirements of your life and happiness at the base. And then all the tools that serve that, like your reasoning mind, is your number one value in service of your life. And your purposes in life are another value in service of your life, and so on. And there's a hierarchy that makes sense. And again, you can make the hierarchy go this way or that way. The point is simply that there's a relationship among these values, and that one of them is at the base or the pinnacle, because it's the most important one. It's the value in service of which all the other values exist. And that is a really, really important thing to know and understand and implement in your life. But it doesn't work for you if you have an unknowable thing that you can't even explain as your fundamental. And that's what religion calls for, and that's what Peterson has put on the table. Now, this young woman, Zena, is going to come back and try to get him to see that if people have different values in that position, that it's going to get rather chaotic, especially if we can't demonstrate that one of them is correct.
So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God, and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell.
If you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell. So if you don't put God at the foundation, you're going to end up in hell. This is just the make-believe world that Peterson is putting in here. When the fact of the matter is that if you don't put life and happiness, if you don't put the factual requirements of human life and the requirements of your life and personal happiness at the foundation of this thing, you'll end up in a kind of hell, but it's not the kind that, has a devil and you burn forever. It's just hell on earth. It's just your life is not going to go well. This is why we need to use reason and come up with a rational morality and a rational hierarchy of values, so that we won't end up in that genuine kind of hell, the kind of hell that can actually exist and does unfortunately exist for so many people. But here you have an intellectual who's one of the most famous intellectuals in the world, dishing out word salad nonsense to young people all over the world, rather than helping them to understand what life is all about, what the requirements of happiness are, how we can live in harmony, and how we can support a free society so that we can all live in harmony together.
Yeah.
So you're saying...
So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right?
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability?
Iterability is what makes one better than that. How about that you can demonstrate that it's true and that it's in service of human life? Why not that as an answer? Now, if you have that, it might be iterable in the sense that you can apply it here and there and everywhere, and it will work, and that's true. But this isn't a student who's being asked this question. This is a 60-some-odd-year-old public intellectual with a PhD in psychology who can't answer the question, what is the standard of value? What is the ultimate value, and why? What makes it right? It's really frustrating, and it's angering because this is poison, and it's just being thrown out there at these young people all over the world. Now, again, Peterson is actually at his best in this segment because he's at least acknowledging that there's such thing as a hierarchy of values and that we need to take this seriously. So kudos to him for that. But man, that's some faint praise.
But why is it that this iterability makes it better? And what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily.
Right.
So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality.
Likely to be selected voluntarily. Again, why not? You can demonstrate that it's true and it's good for human life. Why not go there? There's a whole philosophy out there that's been out there since 1957, Jordan, called objectivism. You've discussed it on your podcast. You've said that Ayn Rand's ideas don't make any sense, but you didn't point out how or why they don't make sense. Why not take a look at it and see whether it makes sense for a moral standard to be both true, meaning there are facts that support it in reality, and good for human life, meaning if you apply it, that everyone who embraces it and tries to live by it can live a wonderful life in harmony with each other and do this thing we call human life. That would be beautiful, but no. We have to have word salads and mysticism and anger at innocent young people who are trying to make sense of what you're saying instead.
In some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony, right?
Yeah, that's better.
Peterson doesn't like the concept of happiness because he doesn't believe that we should be pursuing that. I think in part because it's selfish. I think in part it might also be because he's not happy and he doesn't think it's actually attainable, which is not surprising. I mean, if you accept the ideas that Peterson accepts, I don't think you're going to be happy, and so I think you could become cynical. But note also that happiness, which Zena puts on the table, is a great idea. I mean, it's not, it shouldn't be treated as a standard of value because it's just a mental thing. So it would be subjective to just say happiness or pleasure is the standard because you're dealing only with a mental or psychological phenomenon. What we need is a biological fact, the factual requirements of human life, and then happiness can be seen as the purpose of living, but not the standard of value, and that would be best. So she's very close to, and she's sort of on the Aristotelian, in the Aristotelian tradition in the way that she's looking at this. But Peterson wants to go, he wants to push happiness aside and go to harmony. Why? Because A, it's more abstract and moves further away from some clear conception of what this thing is, and B, it's collectivistic. Where happiness is personal and individual, and harmony involves other people. Now, I have nothing against harmony. Harmony is really, really important, but we're trying to get to fundamentals here. And Peterson is moving away. She wanted to go to something that was pretty close to a fundamental, and he wants to move away from that. And that's telling because it indicates the way that his mind works.
Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Happiness, a lifetime of happiness is short term. Why does happiness have to be short term? I think he's conflating happiness with pleasure or joy. Those are kind of short term. But happiness is, as Ayn Rand put it, and I think she put it accurately, it's a state of consciousness or a state of mind that proceeds from the achievement of your values. And the achievement of your values over time in life becomes a lifetime of happiness. And it doesn't need to be fleeting or momentary. It can be long and sustained and wonderful and deep and rich. And a rational philosophy should help you to see that and understand the principles that make it possible and implement those principles. But we're getting none of that from the world's most famous so-called intellectual.
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right,
Okay,
so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral. It means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good.
Zena brings in this concept of stance independent, and Peterson is a bit confused by this. It's a kind of a technical term that's used by philosophers today when they're talking about realism versus anti-realism in morality or ethics. But Peterson said something earlier in this discussion with Zena that implied that he does understand something about the meaning of that, because he said that value or morality is intrinsic. Intrinsic. Well, that means that it is separate from, out there, separate from human thought, human needs, human life. And that's what an intrinsic good would be, something completely detached from a to whom and for what, a being and a purpose or a need. And that's what stance independent means. So Peterson already has some conception of this. He just hasn't heard this terminology yet. And he's hearing it now from Zena. But the reason I want to put this on the table is that the idea that there could be a stance independent good, a good that is good apart from any human needs, desires, aims, goals, or the like, is an impossibility. It can't be. But religion is precisely the claim that it is. It's God said, or God is the good, and he's out there, and it has nothing to do with the requirements of our life. It's whatever he says. So although Peterson is going to agree to some extent with Zena as this proceeds here, he's in disagreement with her if he believes that God is the good or the ultimate good, because that would be intrinsic, that would be stance independent. It would mean regardless of what I think, believe, want, desire, etc., God is good and his word is correct. But that's not rational. And a rational morality is precisely a morality that derives from looking at reality, understanding that the reason we need morality and concepts like good and bad is because we need to know how to think and act so that we can live and flourish. That's where it all comes from. So there is no stance independent good. That would be, Ayn Rand distinguished between objectivity, which is the recognition, there's an in here part, of a fact of reality, the factual requirements of human life. That would be objective good. Subjective is you just say it's good, or the group just says it's good, or God just says it's good, and that makes it good. So that would be subjective because it's just coming from a consciousness. And then she said the concept of intrinsic is to be reserved for the idea that the good is just out there, detached from our thinking, our minds, our lives, and it's just out there. So that you've got objective means recognition of a fact. You've got both the in here and the out there. Intrinsic means it's just out there, and subjective means it's just in here. And I think this is a really good way to understand the alternatives that are being put on the table here. Zena is wrestling with this idea, and I think what she wants is objective. She wants this something about the human being, but also fact-based. And she, as most rational people, don't think that the idea that, oh, just because someone believes something is good, that makes it so. That's problematic. But this idea of intrinsic being a third alternative is helpful to get your head around, because it really captures, at least religion can be seen as subjective because it comes from the mind of God, or intrinsic because the good is out there in the mind of God. So that can take either of those categories. But objective is what we need as human beings, and that's a distinction that's worth getting into the mix here.
So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good.
What Zena just said is a good description of what is meant by intrinsic. And so kudos to her for really putting her finger on a distinction here that needs to be made, but it's helpful to put a concept to something like that. So park that in your mind. Intrinsic captures this idea, and Peterson even mentioned it earlier. So bring that into your thinking, and that distinction will help you to make these things much more clear.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you
I
mean
mean
independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay, I completely agree.
It's worth noting here that Peterson is saying, I think good is tied up with goal, which is true. But he is going to have a difficult time with this in religious framework. Now, there is a sense in which religionists can say, well, the goal, so God is good, and that's the end of that issue. But the goal of embracing the good is, a lifetime or, eternity in heaven and avoidance of hell. So they can bring in a goal in that sense. But those goals are irrational because there's no evidence for the existence of those goals. So it doesn't make any sense. But it is worth noting that Peterson has sort of having it both ways. God is good, and he's the ultimate good, and also good is goal dependent. And Zena, I think, is trying to clarify this terminology in a way that helps her to get her head around both what he's trying to say and how we can get a rational conception of an ultimate good.
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence.
Oh, right, okay. It is God.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, if that's what makes someone a Christian, man, I hope he just talked a bunch of people out of being Christian. Grab your cross and trudge uphill and suffer. In effect, that's your life. Why on earth would anyone want to go there? And and part of the reason is that people need purpose in life, and if they can't understand a rational basis for purpose, which religion beats out of their heads, as it keeps telling them you can't get purpose from reason and science, they're going to eventually say, well, I need some kind of a thing that makes my time and effort worth exerting, and they're going to turn to things like Christianity or worse. This is what jihadists. This is why jihadists turn to jihad. They have no purpose in life. They have no aim in life. They have nowhere to go in life, and imams or Muslim clerics basically say, well, we've got something for you to do that'll make your life really meaningful. This is dangerous stuff, and it's dangerous whether it winds up with a young person with a suicide vest blowing up a pizzeria full of innocent people, or people flying jets into skyscrapers, or just a young person feeling like he can't achieve happiness and life is going to be just trudging uphill with a cross and the goal of suffering. It's all evil, and it's all anti-life. And here we have, Peterson telling the world that this is the way to live.
Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
Pause on that. He acknowledges that to sacrifice or believe that you should sacrifice is not sufficient to make you Christian. Well, certainly not. Christianity is not the only morality or religion or ideology that calls for human sacrifice. Communism, fascism, in terms of political ideologies, utilitarianism calls for sacrificing for the alleged greater good or greater happiness. Predation is the idea that it's just fine to sacrifice other people for whatever you want. And these are not Christianity, but they are sacrificial. So this goes to the broader issue here, which is that this idea that human sacrifice is in some way good or necessary is the real problem in ethics. Human life doesn't require human sacrifice. It just doesn't. And we've got to get past that nonsense. That needs to become a relic of history, that idea that we can all look back on and just in horror that people ever accepted it.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice.
So now the cosmos is founded on the idea of voluntary self-sacrifice. This is just what it's all about. This is the purpose. This is your purpose, to sacrifice and suffer and die, like Jesus did. He did it the best. You can't do it as well as him, but you can do it. It's poison. This is just sheer poison. And it's really, really tragic. Kudos to these young people for challenging Peterson. I really wish that some of them would look into rational philosophy, rational egoism in particular, and learn more about this. They would save themselves from the suffering that they're probably still facing in trying to transition out of religion, where they've gotten away from this nonsense of getting ideas from the Bible, but many of them still have this idea of sacrifice as a good thing. That altruism is not the equivalent of Christianity or religion. So that's the real hurdle, is getting out of that horrific framework.
So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like, you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way.
Why? Why sacrifice? Why not have a morality of non-sacrifice, where we tell young people, hey, don't give up greater values for the sake of lesser values. Get your values in order. Understand what's important and good for your life. Understand that relationships with other people are enormously important. Understand the ways in which you have to judge and treat other people in order to have good relationships and to live in a free, harmonious society, and act that way. Nobody needs to give up anything. Nobody needs to sacrifice anything or sacrifice other people. We could just live fully as human beings. That's where we need to go, world, and it would be really nice if the top intellectuals could say so.
God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
The biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text.
So this statement that everything written in it has to be contextualized, I mean, in a sense, obviously that's true. You have to read things within context. But in what context is it okay to slaughter innocent men, women, and children, or take slaves? When you lay waste to a village, there is no context in which that is okay. This reminds me of the presidents of Ivy League colleges saying that we have to contextualize what happened after Hamas assaulted Israel and slaughtered 1,200 people on October 7. This is obscene to say anything about we must contextualize this. And again, this is what happens. This is your brain on faith, in effect. This is your brain on religion. And Peterson has to say this kind of thing, because otherwise he's going to have to condemn God and say that the Bible is a book of horrors. And he can't do that because he won't challenge religion.
There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake, because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So,
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics, that's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with that
Well, I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
So here again, we have Peterson just getting vicious and nasty when this young man is just saying things that are true about the Bible and about the idea that if things God calls for in the Bible and things treated as good in the Bible are not, if you can't stomach the idea that this is good, that there's a real problem there in calling yourself a Christian, or since we're talking about the Old Testament, in many of these cases it would be a Jew or a Muslim as well. And this is a perfect, these young people are a bit heated because it's a heated debate. And Peterson has been really nasty to people all the way through this. So you can understand why they're coming to that chair kind of, with some gusto. But Peterson is just being nasty, and he's just talking down to people and being rude. And this is an indication that he's not comfortable with the ideas he's trying to profess, because on some level, I think he knows that they're not true, or at least that they're not defensible. And it's bizarre to see this happening. And it's really sad, because he has so much popularity right now, and so many young people turn to him for guidance. And what they're getting is word salads at best, and poison as well.
So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, "Go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants." What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past.
The question isn't how do we deal with the blood-soaked history of the human past. This questioner is asking Peterson, what do you do with the fact that God ordered this slaughter in the Bible? So Peterson is completely evading the question here. And that is a real demonstration of just pure intellectual dishonesty on his part.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
This is evasive too. Do you think there's ever such a thing as a righteous war? Well, yeah, a war of self-defense. If Russia attacks Ukraine and Ukraine defends itself, it's a righteous war on the part of Ukraine, not on the part of Russia. If Iranian proxies attack Israel and Israel defends itself, that's a justified and perfectly legitimate war on the side of Israel, not on the side of the attackers. But this has nothing to do with this young man's question. So again, the young man tried to get Peterson back on track, and Peterson once again evaded. This is the height of dishonesty.
This one certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not.
Look,
the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it.
Again, absolute evasion. This young man keeps trying to get Peterson to come back to the Bible, back to what actually happens in the Bible, in the story, and what God actually called for. And Peterson, a third time now, at least 3 times, has completely evaded the question and tried to get out of that hot seat that he's been put in here. When you know that you cannot answer something because your ideas will disclose your evil if you do, you need to check the premises on your moral code, on your religion, on whatever the thing is you're trying to defend. And for Peterson to be unwilling to do this is the height of dishonesty and, frankly, just pure evil at this point. This man has no business being regarded as any kind of an intellectual. He's not an intellectual. He's, at best, a mystic postmodernist water muddying moron. And that's at best, because that's implying that his brain has turned, or his mind has turned essentially to sauce so that he can't think anymore. The only alternative is some degree of added to that of evil, that he's just simply intentionally trying to mislead people and take people down a road to hell on earth. This is morally obscene.
The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously.
It's necessary to read the Bible at all levels of analysis simultaneously. You have this book that doesn't make any sense to begin with, that is just made up stories about a guy in the sky, pardon the frank and not so subtle metaphor there, but that's what we have here, this idea that there's a guy in the sky who dictates what we have to do, and we have to love and adore him and accept his existence on faith, etc., etc. And he's tells people to slaughter whole societies and women and children included. And Peterson now wants to tell us that we've got to read this book with all the levels of understanding to get this stuff out of it. No, we don't. What we need to do with the book is call it what it is, trash, and move it out of the realm of human beings using it for any guidance whatsoever. I'm not saying burn the Bible. It's a historic, it's an important historic document, but it is not something that anyone should be getting any guidance from, and it is not something that any reputable intellectual or even remotely good intellectual should be holding up as a value.
And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Self-sacrifice as the foundational belief of what's good is not anti-violence. It is precisely pro-violence, because if you morally should sacrifice but you don't want to, but that's the morally correct way to be. How is society to be set up? How is society to deal with recalcitrants who refuse to do what they morally should do? This is precisely what gives rise to governments that force people to sacrifice, whether these are theocracies or communist dictatorships or fascist dictatorships or the like. So Peterson is trying to run toward a safe zone of the idea of self-sacrifice being good, because he knows everyone accepts that as true, because almost everyone does. And it's a comfort zone that a lot of Christians and other religionists go to. They're like, oh, but whatever the Bible might say, we got to agree that self-sacrifice is a good thing. Let's try to end this debate on something we can all agree on. And this is where people need to learn to not agree on that, but to challenge it and say, why on earth would we permit human sacrifice of any kind or degree anywhere? This is the future of sanity and rational thinking in regard to morality.
And do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the
I think it's a
great making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So,
Okay,
so
so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a
change?
sec.
Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Is God's word moral or not? Is God's word the law or not? And in a sense, this is a silly question because there's no evidence for the existence of God, and the very idea that we even have to be talking about God is absurd. There is no God. There's no evidence for God. There's no need for God. And every time we try to bring God into the equation, we get absurdities in conceptual engagement, and we get atrocities in physical engagement. So let's just get rid of this thing and let's call out intellectuals like Peterson and make them define their terms as these young people are trying to do. In a sense, this debate has been a good thing because it demonstrates the way in which Peterson's evasions and vagueness are used by him and by others to skirt these issues, and it demonstrates the need for clear, concise definitions and for clarity generally.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No,
presumably...
no. You don't get to skate over that, which that's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In what
the
way?
argument is that God...
Wait a sec. You said
waiting a
find
sec.
one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't say any of those words. I'm not sure what conversation you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
So this young man just said, I didn't say any of those words. And Peterson says, don't be a smartass, and gets all stern and top down. Whereas just a few minutes ago, Peterson said, don't put words in my mouth. Like, what is the double standard? A double standard is a demonstration of the fact that the person applying the double standard knows that he is wrong and just refuses to accept the fact. Whether it's for personal psychological issues or for tribal issues, very often an instance of tribalism. But in any event, it is a confession of dishonesty.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral...
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but
Okay,
presumably what the perfect being is revealing...
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our...
We can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
This business of imagine something that's perfect and that's complete. How can you imagine something that's perfect and complete without a standard and even a sphere of identity? Any indicator. I could say, imagine a perfect apple. and you can pull that into your mind. Or I can say, imagine a perfect date or something like that. And you can start to work with it. But imagine a perfect thing without any kind of a standard baked into it. This is the fantasy world of religion. It's just like, we're just going to imagine perfect. Okay, I have perfect in my mind. There we go. That's God. This is not thinking. This is not philosophy. This is at best the most primitive form of philosophy, which is what religion is. It's trying to figure out the nature of the world and what's good and bad and right and wrong and how we can know these things by resorting to a prehistoric way of using the human mind. It's insane.
God is literally the one who created us. He could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait a sec. Let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, this is interesting. So Peterson wants to throw free will out there, and religious people like to do this because they think they've got solid ground for free will because God gave it to us. When the fact of the matter, as this young man is about to point out, is that if God is omniscient and omnipotent, then he knows everything that is ever going to happen, past, present, and future, which means free will is out. Now, Peterson's going to try to push back on this, as religious people often do. They try to split hairs and make distinctions that don't actually have a difference. But the young man is right to pick up on this. But this whole thing is like spaghetti, the way that it moves around, this debate. And it's not the fault of these young people. It's the fact that Peterson will not stay on track and actually deep dive into a subject and lay out in some clear manner what he's thinking and why people should take it seriously. He just
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you,
Yeah,
but have
and
it your
1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you, these analytic philosophers.
Yeah, nothing like an argument from authority and ad populum here to top this all off. That was pretty crazy. Why can't we just point to truths, Jordan? Why do we have to go to, the smart people know better? What are you going to do? I mean, there's an argument from intimidation packed into this, like the young man's supposed to regard other people's or great thinkers from the past as more important than truth as he sees it. Thank you, no. And kudos to him for standing his ground. All right, I think that's enough of this. I mean, I could go on, and I could talk more about some of the other aspects of this discussion that some of the other people engaged in with Peterson. But I just wanted to zero in on some of these elements that I thought were particularly worthy of note or worthy of commentary. This whole debate was, in a sense, a catastrophe. Certainly was a catastrophe for Jordan Peterson. I think his reputation is in the toilet after this, and properly so. He demonstrated himself to be really a monster here, to be this vicious, this evasive, this completely dishonest, this unwilling to acknowledge the facts behind the ideas that he is pushing, or even to acknowledge that he embraces any of those ideas. I mean, the evasion just went to the nth degree. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've got questions about this or want to challenge me on anything, send me an email, and I'll see you next time on Understanding.